Welcome back to The Basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Over the next couple of episodes, we'll be discussing the Beach Boys' Today album, released on March 8, 1965. We'll also discuss the Help Me Ronda single, released on April 5th. Often with these kinds of episodes, in these three cubicles, I'll put some of the new and notable album releases from the time. I don't have enough early 1965 albums to do that, so please enjoy one of my unrelated themes in those cubicles. Today has, of course, become one of the most highly regarded albums of the Beach Boys' career. It undoubtedly includes some great music and is also a triumph of track sequencing. The album contains 2 covers. The rest are credited to Brian Wilson, with Carl co-credited on the sheet music but not the record label for Dance, 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 and Mike co-credited on Please Let Me Wonder. Bull's session with the Big Daddy was credited to the group. After the 1994 lawsuit, Mike's name was added to the writing credits of all the original songs on the album. Beginning with the Be True to Your School in My Room single in October 1963, the Beach Boys singles had followed the formula of putting a fast one on the A side and a slow one on the B side. Their most recent single, the lead-off from the Today album, continued the practice with Do You Wanna Dance on the A side and Please Let Me Wonder on the B side. Today applied that same formula to an album with fast ones on side 1 and slow ones on side 2, with the lead-off single sides kicking off each album side. The sequence of 5 slow ones on side 2 is largely the source of the album's acclaim. It's a beautiful sequence that creates a sustained mood, only to puncture the effect with the final track, Bull Session with the Big Daddy. At the time of the album's release, fans would have been disappointed that 3 of the album's tracks had already been available for some time. Dance, Dance, Dance had been released as a single on October 26, 1964, 4.5 months earlier, and When I Grow Up to Be a Man, back with She Knows Me Too Well, was 6.5 months old, having been released back on August 24, 1964. Do You Wanna Dance and Please Let Me Wonder had been released as a lead-off single 3 weeks before the album. Potentially, fans might already have had 5 of the album's 12 tracks on singles. The issue is alluded to on the back cover with the line, "A program of big Beach Boy favorites, plus some great new Brian Wilson songs." The first track on the album, Do You Wanna Dance, had been released as a lead-off single on February 15th. It was unusual in being the first time the Beach Boys had released a cover song as a single A-side. Bobby Freeman's version had gone to number 5 in 1958. It's piano-based with a slight calypso feel, some Gene Vincent-style echo in the opening, and a rockin' guitar break. As Beanie pointed out back in episode 244, it was a song that a lot of local bands and garage bands would use as a good opening number for teen dances and parties. Beanie also mentioned that it's a song that was and will continue to be widely covered. Cliff Richard released a notable version in 1962 that went to number 2 in the UK. Del Shannon's version hit US number 43 on October 17, 1964, about 3 months before the Beach Boys recorded it. Shannon's version is straightforward Beatle-influenced rock and roll with a guitar and drum kit-based sound, an organ break, and some extremely high backing vocals. The Beach Boys version is very different, but it seems possible that Shannon's version might have reminded Brian of the song and its potential for a remake. In coming years, it'll be notably covered by such disparate artists as the Mamas and Papas, Bette Midler, John Lennon, and the Ramones. As they so often do with their covers during this period, the Beach Boys make it their own. It's a powerful version with a great lead vocal from Dennis that makes you want to sing along. Personally, I've always loved the way he punches the word baby. When they reach the chorus, the group harmony explodes into the mix, propelling it forward. I especially like Brian's wailing falsetto in the final chorus. As a single A-side, it'll peak at a slightly disappointing number 12 on April 10, 1965, making it their first single A-side to miss the top 10 since 1962. When Shutdown Volume 2 was released slightly less than a year earlier, Brian was dissatisfied with the album. It had been completed in a rush under pressure from Capitol and wasn't up to the overall standard that Brian envisioned for the Beach Boys. Things improved significantly 5 months later with All Summer Long. Now, with Brian having come off the road, Part of his rationale was that he could devote the kind of time and attention to Beach Boys albums that they deserved. Now, with the second track on the album, Good to My Baby, Brian showed he wasn't kidding. It's a great record. For almost any other group, it would have been a contender for a single A-side. The fact that it was just an album track for the Beach Boys reflected the strength of the records that Brian was creating. The group vocal arrangements are on full display here, with Brian and Mike sharing the lead vocal and playing beautifully off each other. The track is complex with lots of unusual changes that keep it interesting, but remains catchy and completely accessible. Track 3, Don't Hurt My Little Sister, famously was written by Brian for Phil Spector to produce for the Ronettes. According to David Leaf's notes in the 1990 Today Summer Days 2 for CD release, after submitting it, Brian was invited to Spector's hotel room where Spector played him a version on piano that he had unilaterally rewritten into a song called Things Are Changing for the Better. A few days later, Brian played piano on Spector's recording session for the song until Spector kicked him out, telling Brian that he couldn't play it right. In other versions of the story, it was still Don't Hurt My Little Sister when Spector recorded it, ending up with an unfinished backing track that was later adapted into Things Are Changing. In some versions, Spector was cutting the track for Darlene Love instead of the Ronettes. Of course, as we know, Spector would sometimes record tracks and decide later who they were for. Looking at subsequent events, which we'll discuss in a moment, it seems unlikely that Spector would have retitled it Things Are Changing at the time the track was recorded. Regarding the session in his book, I Am Brian Wilson, Brian says only that he watched Spector record it. All other versions of the story seem to agree that Spector kicked Brian out for substandard piano playing, adding yet another piece of evidence into my long-held theory that Phil Spector was a jerk. I wasn't able to come up with a date for the Spector sessions. Circumstantially, it seems like it probably took place in the late spring of 1964 before the Beach Boys recorded their version. The Beach Boys began recording it on June 22, 1964, about 3 weeks before the release of the All Summer Long album, and returned to it in January 1965 when they finished it for Beach Boys Today. The lyrics, of course, are a warning from a sibling to their sister's boyfriend to treat her right. Brian said it was inspired by his then girlfriend and her sisters, the Ravels, and that he wrote it from the perspective of one of them telling him not to treat another one of them badly. It's a lyric that probably would have worked better coming from a female singer, and it's understandable that Brian intended it to be sung by the Ronettes. It seems more like advice you'd get from your girlfriend's sister than from her brother, so it's a bit of an awkward fit lyrically for the Beach Boys. In any case, it comes across as kind of a fictional story song rather than anything widely relatable or sincerely heartfelt, which slightly limits its appeal compared to other tracks on the album. Still, it's a good song with a strong backing track and some excellent vocals from the group. Brian will reuse the chord sequence in the chorus for California Girls. Here again, we have a showcase for complex and compelling group vocals, and once again, Brian's high vocal and Mike's low vocal play off against each other beautifully. It's probably a better vocal arrangement by virtue of having been recorded in January 1965 than it would have been had they recorded it along with the backing track in June 1964. In late 1965 or early 1966, Phil Spector's 1964 backing track will be finished as Things Are Changing for the Better for use as a public service announcement for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, established by President Johnson in 1964. Versions were recorded featuring vocals by the Blossoms, the Supremes, and Jay and the Americans. In May 1966, reportedly, copies of the record were distributed to more than 4,000 disc jockeys to promote new, non-discriminatory employment opportunities created by the EEOC. The recordings were never meant for commercial release. The album's fourth track, When I Grew Up to Be a Man, had been released as a single A-side on August 24, 1964, about 6.5 months before its appearance on Today. We discussed this track and the B-side in detail in episode 212, along with side 2 of All Summer Long. The single came out about 5 weeks after All Summer Long, so it's a track that belongs more closely to that era. Fans might have been slightly disappointed to get an older track here instead of something new, but there's certainly something to be said for having it on an album instead of just a 45. Next up is a new Brian Wilson original, Help Me Ronda. Brian said he came up with the song while fooling around on the piano imitating Bobby Darin singing Mac the Knife. He said he was trying to come up with a cool shuffle beat and that it took several hours to write. Mac the Knife may have been the beginning of Help Me Rhonda, but the result is different enough that it's sure not a connection I'd have ever made. Brian has also said it was inspired by Buster Brown's obscure 1959 single Fannie Mae, which is built around a blues riff virtually identical to Help Me Rhonda, help me Rhonda. The similarity here is unmistakable. If you've never heard it, you can find it on YouTube. I think you'll find it interesting. It might be the Buster Brown inspiration that led Brian to make the recording bluesy by Beach Boys standards. Brian continued giving each one of the guys a vocal showcase by having Al sing lead on this. It's his first lead vocal on a Beach Boys record, apart from Christmas Day on the Beach Boys' Christmas album, released about 5 months earlier. Brian recalls the Help Me Rhonda album sessions as tedious, with Al having trouble getting the vocal right, and Brian experimenting with using ukulele, harmonica, and odd vocal arrangements. Of course, not every experiment is going to be effective. The up and down volume on Help Me Rhonda, help me Rhonda in the ending choruses has always reminded me of something my brother might have done with the volume knob on the stereo when we were teenagers to annoy me. Happily, it won't be used in the single version. Alan admits he had trouble with the vocal, particularly singing Rhonda You Look So Fine the way Brian wanted it. Of course, even before Today was released, Brian and the group were busy re-recording it for their next single. More about that next time. The side closes with Dance, 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 a single A-side released 4.5 months earlier on October 26, 1964, just a week after Beach Boys' concert. The single had spent 2 weeks at number 8 beginning December 19th. Once again, fans might have been mildly disappointed to have a previously released single filling out the album rather than a new song, but Dance, Dance, Dance is an excellent track and it's nice to have it in an LP format. We talked about it in detail in episode 215, Concert Dance, Dance, Dance. Now we've arrived at the legendary side 2 of Beach Boys Today. It's the slow side and a showcase for some of Brian's most emotionally effective songwriting. In his book, I Am Brian Wilson, he points out that these weren't exactly love ballads, but instead were snapshots of how he was feeling as he grew up. In his earlier memoir, Wouldn't It Be Nice, he notes that he had taken up smoking marijuana and that the whole second side of Beach Boys Today had been written and arranged while he was high. Side 2 begins with the beautiful Please Let Me Wonder. It strikes me as one of the most straightforward of Brian's love songs. So many of Brian's love songs feature arguments, jealousy, and insecurity. Apart from shaking and not making himself say what he planned to say, things seem to be pretty copacetic in Please Let Me Wonder, though of course the plea is to keep the fantasy of being in love alive by not learning if the feeling runs both ways. Brian's vocal has a very open feel to it as well, and Carl's spoken I love you is surprisingly earnest. By the way, some sources attribute the I love you line to Brian. David Leaf says it's Carl. It sounds like Carl to me. If you happen to know definitively, please pass it along. In any case, the song is bravely honest. The arrangement is beautiful and sets the tone for the second side. At a session in January, Mike had reportedly gotten frustrated with the number of takes Brian was requiring to get Mike's co-lead vocal up to Brian's specifications. As the B-side of Do You Wanna Dance, Please Let Me Wonder will hit number 52 on the chart on March 27, 1965. Next up is the second of 2 cover versions on Today, I'm So Young. The song's writer was in fact so young when the song was written. It was by Cincinnati, Ohio high school student William H. Perez Tyrus Jr., and first recorded by the Students, who released it as a single A-side in May 1958. There were various cover versions, most of them pretty obscure over the next few years. Brian would have certainly known it from the 1964 album Presenting the Fabulous Ronettes, which of course contains Brian's all-time favorite record, Be My Baby. The Ronettes version is listed simply as So Young. It's not starkly different from the Beach Boys version, though the sound is more cavernous, and to modern ears at least, its production and arrangement sound deeply rooted in the early 60s. Weirdly, Hal Blaine's drumming seems to be showcased on the Ronettes version every bit as much as the Ronettes' voices. The Beach Boys first attempted it on September 9, 1964. That version was released as a bonus track on the 1990 Two for CD issue. It's simpler with a looser feel, lots of echo, and features more prominent bass and a flute. It's nice enough, but pales in comparison to the final version. Backing for the released version was recorded on January 18, 1965, with vocals recorded the next day. I find the Beach Boys version much more direct and emotional than either the Students or the Ronettes versions. As I mentioned when we talked about Don't Worry Baby, to me the difference between Phil Spector and Brian Wilson is that Spector could make a song sound big. Brian Wilson could make a song sound big and intimate at the same time. The hollow sound of the notes leading into the ending coda especially is lonely and affecting. It remains rooted in doo-wop while the arrangement makes it utterly modern. The Beach Boys had already presented the lyrical theme of being too young to marry in We'll Run Away, and of course we'll revisit it again in 1966 with Wouldn't It Be Nice. That's where we'll leave it for this week. I hope you'll join me next time when we wrap up side 2 and talk about the Help Me Ronda single. In the meantime, have a great week, and as always, I look forward to your comments, perspectives, insights, and feedback. Bye.